One of the things I've learned in roughly 6.5 years of podcasting, one of the fundamental lessons I've learned, one of the first things I would pass on to an apprentice podcaster, one of the things, the knowledge of which makes me a veteran of this industry, of this medium, is it's really, really helpful if you have something to say. Especially for a solo podcaster, it's really helpful. It's really fundamental if you have something to say. This week, I don't really have anything to say, but I also know that there are among you several, probably can catch you all on one hand, but several, is that several? A few who, I was about to say, depend upon this podcast every week. That might be pushing it a little, but there are a few of you out there who count listening to this podcast on Wednesday as part of your routine, as one of the things that makes you happy. And being a lifelong people pleaser, it would kill me to leave you hanging this week, even though it causes me a great deal of cognitive dissonance to release a podcast that doesn't really have anything to say. And it's lousy timing for that because my Music City Live episode is going to appear soon. And there's a fair to good chance that the people who come to check out this show as a result of seeing me on that show are going to encounter this episode as the first one. And I must lead with the disclaimer that says there are better ones. Last week, Drowning Lessons, probably the best solo podcast I've ever done. Start there. Start there. This one's for the insiders. And I can say that because I suspect, I can reasonably figure you'll allow me a certain amount of leeway with the content of this week's podcast, because I'm doing it for you. I don't want to let you down. But I can tell you right now that what follows is going to be one of the most self-indulgent podcast episodes I have ever released. I fully intend, the second after hitting publish, to melt into a puddle of shame, and it will shock me if any of you find value in it whatsoever. And I shall attempt to wax semi-eloquent about some stuff after we do the thing. I can frame this one as kind of a public service. I can frame this one as, you'll see on social media once in a while, somebody will put up, "Hey, new followers, here's an introduction to me." So I can frame it that way. This is get to know me, because you're all full of questions about this mysterious podcast host, which is not true at all, and you and I both know it. But there are a few new listeners. I will say this. There are a few new listeners. I have documented evidence that there are a few new listeners over the past 5, 6 weeks, 2 months. And so there's stuff about your humble host, which you may not know, and which may provide some context for you as you listen to these episodes. And so maybe it's not completely up my own hole, which is a thing that Blind Boy would say, to tell you just a little bit about me. It doesn't get more self-indulgent than that, and I'm having a great deal of cognitive dissonance about it all right now. But I don't want to let you down. Those of you, again, who not quite depend on this podcast to get you through your Wednesday. So these are just a few of my favorite things. Maybe we'll call it a few of my favorite things. And it's lighthearted. Okay, last week was a heavy one. All right, last week was my best episode probably because I confessed to a great deal of shame, and I tried to do that in a fun and an upbeat way. But the truth is that was an incredibly difficult episode for me to release because it was embarrassing. I had to admit some weakness. I had to be vulnerable, and I had to admit some shame. So maybe it's not such a bad idea to have a palate cleanser this week. Those of you who are new to the podcast may not know some stuff about me. Some trivial stuff, some fun stuff. We're allowed to have a little fun. Are we not allowed to have a little fun, kids? So these are a few of my favorite things, all right. You'll say, John, I don't even like to say my own name. J-Dubs, what's your favorite movie anyways? Those of you who have listened for a long time know that I'm not a movie guy. Movies are not part of my heritage. Movies are not in my blood. I grew up in the evangelical Christian world where movies were a sin. Going to the movies was a worldly thing to do. Movies were to be consumed in the privacy of your own home with a rented VCR where all of the sinners out there wouldn't know what you were watching. But Jesus knows and Santa knows. I didn't grow up in movie culture. It wasn't part of my life. Almost everybody I know has this great connection to and affection for movies. I just don't have it. Didn't see the Star Wars movies. I've still never seen E.T. That's my great trivia thing. I've never seen E.T. Don't want to see it. Don't need to be sad. I have subsequently seen the Star Wars movies. Okay, I have caught up on some of the culture. And I do have a few traditional favorites. All right. You know that the philosophical framework for this podcast was provided by Fast Times at Ridgemont High, so that's one of my favorites. The first Terminator movie, which is, in my estimation, still by far the best Terminator movie. Also a favorite of mine. I can't not watch at least some of The Shawshank Redemption when I'm flipping the channels and see it. I love Forrest Gump. I like Castaway. That's not a Tom Hanks thing. That's a coincidence. So there are films that I like. I tend to like indie films. I tend to like relationship films. I'm not a big action movie guy. I do love the Deadpool movies because they're funny and irreverent, and that's what I am. But I don't tend to go for the popcorn movies. Loved Jurassic Park. Loved Titanic. All right, when I was a kid, growing up, I had a couple of enduring fascinations. One was dinosaurs. The other was Titanic, for some reason. Probably because I come from a nautical family. There is a great seafaring tradition in my family. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Great Lakes fisherman. My dad himself is a Navy veteran. And my grandma, when I was growing up, we went nearly every Sunday to grandma's house after church. And she had a bookshelf. Upon the bookshelf was an old book published in I don't even know when. It was about Titanic. And so my dad liked that story, and we would talk about it sometimes, and I would look through the Titanic book. There was an illustration in it of just the Titanic on top of the water, and then underneath it, cupped two hands, like the hands of God. Would have been better if those were up closer to the surface of the water, you know what I mean? But I developed a fascination with the story of Titanic. I'm a history person, all right? I get a lot of that from my dad. My dad was a history person, particularly a military history person, and so I grew up developing a fascination with the U.S. Civil War, which was his historical hobby horse. My historical hobby horse is the First World War, owing to it's the Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Sopwith Camel scene, which is one of the most bizarre sequences you will ever find in a children's cartoon. And of course, I watched in it would have been 1980, the made-for-television remake of All Quiet on the Western Front, which first came out in the 30s and is still, I think the 30s, still a harrowing war film. They remade that in 79-80 with John Boy Walton, starring as Paul, and I watched that with my dad. It was the first time I can remember staying up late. First time I can remember being allowed to stay up late. And probably not something I necessarily should at that age have been watching, but I did watch it and I was utterly fascinated by the whole concept of the First World War. And then I trundled down to the local library and I brought back about 8 books. I dragged back for blocks about 8 books in this series about the First World War. And I most certainly should not have been reading those. Little too young for that, and I remember distinctly opening up one of the books and finding in it a photograph of a German soldier, deceased, in a trench, and it was just a skeleton with a helmet on, and I was freaked the F out, and probably still am, later in life, as I was looking again into that conflict, indulging my historical interest, I ran across that photo again and had a friggin' flashback. It was a little bit like the chlorine at the pool when I went swimming. Where was I going with that? Titanic. Really like Titanic because it brought to life, up to a point, that story that I had been so fascinated with as a kid. And then Jurassic Park came along. Earlier, Jurassic Park came along, and I had this fascination with dinosaurs too. Again, it's a history thing. Again, it's friggin' dinosaurs, man. Every kid loves dinosaurs. And then Jurassic Park came along and presented visually dinosaurs. And so those movies resonate with me. Another movie that I have to watch at least a little bit of is Saving Private Ryan. I have not traditionally been a World War II guy. I am a World War I guy. I've become more of a World War II guy. There's a lot more film about that. There's a lot more media about that. And so I've developed, slowly but surely, something of a fascination with the Pacific Theater, whatever was going on in Europe. I've not visited the sites. I mean, you will know, some of you, that back in around 2008, I finally did my dream trip, which was a pilgrimage to First World War sites in Belgium and France. And so I went to Vimy and Beaumont-Hamel and Passchendaele, Hill 60, a bunch of places, Courcelette, of relevance to the Canadian experience of World War I. But Private Ryan is Private Ryan. And that opening sequence is as harrowing as it gets on film. None of those are my favorite movie, though. Those of you who have been listening even recently will know that my favorite movie of all time is Cyrano de Bergerac, 1950, starring Jose Ferrer. And I've talked about this in the past. I don't need to do another explanation. But somewhere along the way, on TV, no doubt on a Sunday afternoon on PBS, I encountered this film, Cyrano de Bergerac, about this mesmerizing character who is a poet and a soldier and a playwright and a romantic and so courageous and feels himself utterly unlovable because he has a giant nose. And with whom should he fall in love but the fairest of them all, Roxane? And it's this story of Cyrano wooing her on behalf of the sort of dumbass Christian who does not have any of Cyrano's passion, soul, poetry, romance. But what he does have is a pretty damn face. And the vapid Roxane falls for Christian, and Cyrano expresses his love to her, who he feels he cannot have, through Christian. And I was a romantic kid, all right? Unlucky in love, unrequited. That was me. I was a poet of sorts. I was a romantic. I was a passionate. And I recognized somehow in this odd character a kindred spirit. And then Jose Ferrer's portrayal of Cyrano is just magnificent. And I've talked before about how I went to see the Stratford production of Cyrano, starring Combeferre, and he just didn't present the character in the same sort of angst-ridden, destroyed way that Jose Ferrer did. And it's my favorite movie of all time. Weird one, right? Like nobody ever says that. Yeah, my favorite movie is Jose Ferrer and Cyrano de Bergerac, 1950. But it is still my favorite film. So if you didn't know that about me, there you go. What's my favorite song? That one should be more interesting, right? Because I'm a musician. But I was cut off from music too, at least theoretically. We didn't have movies that I could go to. I didn't go to the school dances. I didn't do any of that stuff. Certainly didn't go to the keg parties out in the bush. I was not as well theoretically allowed to listen to secular music. But I did, all right? I snuck in cassettes, got busted once or twice. Others, people would give me cassettes of Christian contemporary music, thank you very kindly, and I would dub over them the latest Motley Crue record. My neighbor, God love him, had Van Halen's 1984, and he had Twisted Sister. I'm like 10 years old, encountering rock music for the first time through my neighbor, and 1984 remains one of my favorite records as a result. And I grew up loving the glam metal, dude. I grew up loving the rock and roll. I had to be contraband about that. I had to listen to other people's cassettes. And yeah, I also grew up in the wild and wacky world of Christian rock music in the 80s, some of which was hilariously bad, but holds a special place in my heart. Some of it was actually quite good. And there are bands from that era that I still listen to actually, and some of them probably deserved to be heard in the wider world. And some of it was hilariously awful. But I was cut off. I never got to see the bands that I love so much at their peak, and it destroys me in some ways. It's one of the great regrets that I have that is not my fault, is that I never got to see Queensryche on the Empire tour. I never got to see Cinderella. I never got to see Tesla, Slaughter, some of these bands at their absolute peak. And I never got to experience what it was like in those days to really be part of that scene. One of the reasons I love Steel Panther so much is that you go to the Steel Panther show and it's as though you stepped back into 1988. You're there again, right? All the warm-up music is glam metal from the era and a couple of King's X songs. I have distinctly heard King's X as part of the pre-show music for Steel Panther gigs. And for me, it's like stepping through time. For me, I can pretend that I'm 16 and I'm actually going to see some of these bands that I loved so much actually play shows. You know, I have friends who saw all of them at their peak when the scene was the scene, when that was the preeminent music of the day. It's not like that now. I've subsequently seen Tesla a couple times when they were great, but it's not the same. I've seen versions of LA Guns. I've seen versions of Warrant, Dokken. I've seen them all, but not the real thing. The only one I really got to see in their prime, of course, was Stryper. And they were great, and White Lion opened, and so I got that at least. But I missed it all, and it's a great regret of mine that I did, but it was my fault. I had no choice about it. I love all that music, but none of that is my favorite song. You know what my favorite song is. Longtime listeners to the podcast know very well that my favorite song is, I'm on the record as saying my favorite song is Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes by Edison Lighthouse. They were a short-lived band in England, and they released this song, which is as bubblegum pop as it gets, in 1970. Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. Why is it my favorite song? Well, it's one of the first songs I ever heard. When I was a kid, little tiny kid, we had one of those record players, stereo systems that was a piece of friggin' furniture. It was like 6 feet long. It had an 8-track player in it and a turntable and then all the storage for your vinyl. And as a little kid, I used to lean up against one of the speakers and just listen. Listen to whatever we had. You know, we had a handful of 45s, and one of them was Mess of Blues by Elvis, which is still one of my favorite Elvis songs. Baby, What Do You Want Me to Do, I think, is my favorite Elvis song. But Mess of Blues, these are kind of deep cuts for Elvis, you know. I'd listen to that. And one of the ones that we had was this song, Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes by Edison Lighthouse. I don't know if they ever had another song. Tony Burrow was the singer, and you can go on YouTube right now and you can look at them performing that song on Top of the Pops or whatever. And my goodness, don't those 60s ladies look fantastic? It's great. It's a bubblegum pop song, and it was one of the first songs I ever heard and one of the first songs I ever loved. And I forgot about it really for a very long time. Then in the course of making this podcast, I'm talking about a lot of music, and it came back to me, and I went and I found it. And it holds up. It holds up. Weezer should cover that. Weezer would do a killer cover of Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. It is my favorite song of all time, traditionally on the record, but there are thousands of songs that I love, and on any given Sunday, any one of them could be listed as my favorite song of all time. But those who are interested who didn't know, Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. It's just, it tugs at my heartstrings. It tugs at my nostalgia like few other songs do. And I still listen to it a lot. And you know what? Every time I do, I friggin' smile. And I sing along as best I can. And it's a wonderful song. And there are other ones that would surprise you maybe. Those of you who have been listening for a long time, I've already talked about all this. It's the newbies that I'm speaking to this week. Magic by Olivia Newton-John. Huge, huge. Way up on my list of favorite songs. Love that one. There's some other strange ones too. And ain't that just like life? Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes. What's your favorite TV show, Jack? What's your favorite TV show? When I was a kid, I loved The Incredible Hulk. And my dad was very much an athlete, very much into weightlifting. My dad, those of you who may have known him back in the day, had the largest arms in the neighborhood. And so he was into bodybuilding, into powerlifting. And so I adopted some of that culture in my own life. And so back in the 70s, I was introduced to the likes of Lou Ferrigno as the Incredible Hulk. And I was always impressed with the muscle guys. Wanted to be one. Tried hard to be one. Never quite got to Lou's level. But I was fascinated by all of that. And it was part of my dad's life. And so became part of mine. And Lou Ferrigno as the Incredible Hulk was the thing to me. This giant guy with all the muscles. And then when they started making Incredible Hulk movies in like the 90s, 2000s, I was thoroughly disappointed that they were all CGI giants. Like, that's not the Hulk. Lou Ferrigno is the Hulk. He's got green hair, and I'm pretty sure he's wearing sandals. Regardless, as a kid, loved the Incredible Hulk, loved Starsky and Hutch. Remember Starsky and Hutch, kids? I liked the theme song from season 1, and I liked the Gran Torino car with the stripe. And I liked Starsky. So I liked Starsky and Hutch as a kid. And Three's Company. Liked Three's Company, even though, in retrospect, the premise of that show was frigging absurd. Like it's a scandal for a guy to live with two girls in California in the 1970s. That's a scandal? I don't think so. And then, of course, looking at it through our frame of reference now, the campy way in which Jack was played for a gay character and all of the cheap laughs that they pulled out of that. I've talked on previous podcasts about how all of that worked in the 70s, 80s, particularly in the 80s, I think, how gay characters were played for cheap laughs. But then there were moments when shows that you might not expect really flipped that upside down, Night Court being the primary one from a previous episode. And I love Night Court, by the way. So Three's Company, Night Court. Later on, Seinfeld, of course. I always loved ER. I loved NYPD Blue. I think my favorite show, though, and I've never said this out loud before, I think my favorite show is MASH. I think my favorite show is MASH. If I'm flipping the channels on a Friday night, because again, my life is such a full oyster. If I'm flipping the channels on a Friday night and I'm stopping on anything, it's not Seinfeld, much as I love Seinfeld. It's MASH. It's MASH. That's partly the history in me. That's partly, it's just a really good show. I hated MASH as a kid. You get home from school and you've got an hour or so between getting home from school and dinner time. And so you flip on the TV and there'd be a Barney Miller rerun or a Three's Company rerun. And then you'd be flipping and it'd be like, all it's on is MASH. And it's too green. It's too friggin' green. I was too young for it. I didn't get it. But as I got older, I started A, becoming interested in history, particularly military history, and B, I started to get the humor a little bit. Now, you will know, some of you old school folks, some of you genuine old timers with respect to this podcast will know that the first experience I had of MASH was the finale, 1983, I think, the series finale of MASH, which I think remains probably the most watched episode of anything that's ever been broadcast on television. I was 10. Somehow this was on TV. I think it was on almost everybody's TV. And I was watching this having no idea what it was or what was going on. And somehow I was allowed to stay up. It's like a 2-hour episode. I was allowed to stay up to watch the end. Now, those of you who can, remember the final shot of MASH. The final episode. The war is over. Everybody's going home. BJ can't say goodbye to his best friend, Hawkeye. He's just incapable of saying goodbye. He's got a mental block about it. Hawkeye's really upset about that because Trapper John had left without saying goodbye, because Henry Blake had left and then been killed in a plane crash on the way home. And for Hawkeye, it's a traumatic thing that Beej won't say goodbye. And then the last shot is the helicopter lifting Hawkeye away from the MASH unit. And then he looks down and BJ has spelled out goodbye in stones on the ground. And as a 10-year-old, I fell apart. Those of you who didn't have a soft spot for me before will most certainly have one now, picturing 10-year-old me having no idea what's going on, being so affected by one moment in the series finale of a TV show that tears spilled from his eyes. I have always been an empath, kids. I have always been just an emotional human being. I try hard to hide it sometimes, but the truth is I'm a big ass softy. And at 10 years old, that got me. But then as a 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old, I would see MASH on the TV. Wasn't all that interested, found it annoying. But then something clicked at a certain point. I was 17 maybe. And I just started to really love MASH. And I still really love MASH. I got a brand new giant TV set a few years ago. And we got a new cable package installed. And the first thing I watched on my new TV with my new cable was a rerun of MASH. And I will deliberately, on a Friday night or a Saturday night, sitting at home with nothing to do, all alone by myself, will flip on the TV and go immediately to the guide looking to see what episodes of MASH are playing on TV that night. So I've developed a genuine fascination for the show MASH, and I think it's my favorite TV show. I've been watching some interesting stuff lately on Netflix, Love Life, Nobody Wants This, that kind of romantic comedy that's a little bit annoying. Some of the others, I watched Breaking Bad, I watched other things. I drift towards comedy for the most part. I started watching just this week The Big C, which is Laura Linney, and I really like Laura Linney. Ever since Love Actually, I really like Laura Linney. And she stars as a woman who's been diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma, cancer, and it's weird because it's kind of a lighthearted approach to it. At least in the initial episodes, I don't know if it gets heavier. I started watching that and I'm really enjoying it. Actually, those of you who have recent experience of cancer maybe don't want to go there. And I fully understand that because it's friggin' awful. But I think it's MASH. I think it's MASH. And I'm going to hold that up right now. Who's your favorite author? Who's your favorite fiction writer? You would think somebody who is a qualified English teacher, somebody who has a degree in English literature, would have a lot to say about that. But the truth is, I haven't read anything in quite a long time. I was an avid reader for a while. I think I developed a mental block about reading because I was forced to do so much of it in university and in high school, or at least in high school, I was forced to pretend that I had done the reading. I once was given a mercy grade of 50% on an English test for creativity in the answers about a book I had not read. I think it was Gatsby. And there's kind of a fun turnaround in that. But we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm not an avid reader of fiction anymore. And so I don't have a list as long as your arm of fiction writers I might talk about. It's a toss-up. My two favorite writers are probably Douglas Coupland and Mark Lehner. Coupland changed me back when I was a fiction writer, which I was for 10 years diligently, with no results really. But my whole approach to writing fiction changed with the novel Life After God by Douglas Coupland. And when I have the discussion in a minute of what my favorite book is, that's part of it. I had never read anything written in quite the same way as Life After God. It's described as a collection of short stories. I don't think it is. I think it's a collection of anecdotes all about and by the same character that tie together. And Douglas Coupland has this really remarkable ability to find beauty in the mundane. He has a way, there was a thing for a while called the Coupland moments. People writing about having these odd experiences out in the world of these sort of quietly beautiful but strange and very modern things. Finding some beautiful reflection in a cell phone or something like that. Like Coupland, for a while, was recognized as the zeitgeist guy or the futurist guy, the guy who could see where all of this was going. I don't even think he's writing anymore. He's more wrapped up in doing art these days. Life After God changed me because I didn't know you could write that way. I didn't know you could write in this quiet, episodic, disjointed, confessional way. I was a traditionalist. Stuff I was reading in university was 1800s. It was classics. It was structured in such a way. And then this much more modern style of narrative, at least I thought it was, but it harkens back to The Catcher in the Rye and that sort of thing. I mean, there is a tradition of this. I just not really encountered it before. So there I am struggling as a fiction writer, trying initially to write epic fantasy because that's kind of what I read in high school. And then I encountered Life After God. I encountered it in the most synchronistic way. I was living in Japan. My former spouse and I, where it was the second year of our marriage, we were living in Japan. We had a tatami mat room apartment, this tiny little apartment, sliding paper doors, tatami mats, the whole thing. And it was an apartment that was rented by the JET program, which is the Japanese Exchange and Teaching Program, which my spouse was working through. She was hired by JET, her being ancestrally half Japanese. She was there on kind of a culture quest. I was there because I was married to her. And so the JET program ran this apartment, and so it was home to a series of English exchange teachers. One year it was us. And there was a cubby, which amounted to all of the storage space in this place. And in the cubby, people had left stuff behind. The stuff had accumulated there from past teachers, including a bunch of books, one of which was Life After God. And so I found it quite synchronistically, quite by accident. I wasn't looking for it. And I devoured it, and it changed me. It's like, oh, wait a minute. You can write like this? You can write modern, confessional, quiet, profound. You can do this? I didn't know that. And that opened me up utterly as a writer. And then a lot of what I wrote subsequently was a cheap ripoff of Douglas Coupland, which is why none of it was ever published. But I kept the book. And in one of the great Coupland moments of my life, fast forward 8 or 9, no, not quite that, 5 or 6 years, I'm living in L-Town. Coupland's coming to read. He's coming to read at the local library as part of a literary festival. I'm going. And I still got Life After God. And so it was on the eve of my 30th birthday, which in Coupland world would be a profound moment. I actually got to meet and shake hands with the man and hand him my Life After God book. And he signed it and he drew 2 little hands in it. And what a great moment that was for me, and a profound moment for me, because I had thought up to that point that he and I were kindred spirits, very similar, because we seemed to be writing about existential stuff, existential angst. We seemed to be writing about a lot of the same things. Then I realized he was writing about those things, and I was just kind of copying him, but I thought we were the same sort of person. And then I heard him read and I met him and I'm like, oh, we're not like each other at all. He's doing Douglas Copeland and I'm doing Douglas Copeland. Not surprisingly, he's doing it way better than I am. And I never quite recovered from that. That's not the point. The point is, Copeland is one of my favorite writers because his stuff is profound and it's funny and it makes you think and it's scattered and it's emotive and evocative. And so he's in the conversation. The other obvious choice is the great Mark Lehner, who is a psycho, who is a literary psycho, and his books are not for the faint of heart. But his writing is so weird and so frigging funny and so intelligent. The thing about Lehner is he's way smarter than everybody. He's so smart that you don't even know what he's doing. And somebody that intelligent and that articulate with such a vocabulary, writing in some ways stuff that is so puerile and filthy, is hilarious objectively. And so it's a toss-up for me between Copeland and Mark Lehner as to who my favorite fiction writer is. What's my favorite book? My favorite novel? Again, remember, this episode is for the new listeners, or I'm trying to acquaint you a little bit, providing some sort of cultural context for who I am talking at you every week. And I know at least some of you are interested in this stuff. Fiercely interested in this stuff. And so my favorite novel is going to be possibly Life After God, possibly H.U. Babe by Mark Lehner, which is the funniest thing I've ever read. It is just an absolutely lunatic novel where the character, especially in his early books, the main character of Mark Lehner's books was always Mark Lehner, a version of Mark Lehner. They almost read like autobiographies, but it's an insane representation of Mark Lehner. And in H.U. Babe, he is, of course, a world best-selling author who's running an empire with a compound just pumping out Mark Lehner stuff. And he's a complete megalomaniac, and it's nuts and hilarious. There's a character who doesn't have hands, he has flippers. And Mark Lehner gets arrested for sneaking into, I'm not sure what museum, I forget now, one of the big ones in Washington, and stealing a vial of Abraham Lincoln's morning breath. And then huffing it, and the hallucination that follows. The whole thing is nuts, but it is so funny and so intelligent and so silly all at the same time, and I just love it. So H.U. Babe by Mark Lehner is the book I most recommend to people, especially if they want to read something weird. But I'm not just a nutcase, man. I'm mostly a nutcase. The Grapes of Wrath is another of my favorite novels, Steinbeck, and that's a much different thing than Mark Lehner. I mean, that is the very real and very serious story of migrant farmers in the 30s, 40s, leaving the Dust Bowl in the American Midwest to go to California, trying to find ways to survive. It's an absolutely gut-wrenching story of class, story of survival. It's not a book that I go back and read often because it's a harsh one, but there are passages of philosophy in that novel that are just absolutely breathtaking. The way the novel is written, it kind of alternates between telling the actual narrative of the story about the characters, the Joad family, and then interspersed are chapters that kind of paint the context historically, kind of paint the scene more widely than that. And these are the philosophical sections that are just so powerfully and so beautifully written that they just stop me in my tracks every time. And many years ago, my former spouse gifted me for birthday or Christmas a really beautiful hardcover edition of The Grapes of Wrath. And there's some writing in there that just blows me away to this day. It just blows me away to this day. The philosophy, the history, written so beautifully by Steinbeck. And so The Grapes of Wrath is in the top 4 probably. And then, of course, Gatsby himself. And I'm pretty sure it was Gatsby that I had fudged the answers to that test on in grade 10 or 11 and received 50% for creativity. And I'll take that. I'll take that. That's a win for me. I didn't get Gatsby at all as a teenager because I was a teenager. I was a friggin' idiot. I was a friggin' idiot up until about, 6 or 7 months ago, probably. I might still be. I didn't get it in high school. I was not a diligent high school student, okay? I was a diligent university student. I don't know what happened, but something did. I was a Dean's List student and a diligent student in university. High school, not so much. High school, I was a class clown. High school, I was most noted for being that guy who doesn't care about anything and makes everybody laugh. And that was my identity and that was my shtick. And I have integrity, and so doing actual schoolwork didn't fit with the persona, man. Played a lot of trumpet, though. So I didn't read Gatsby in high school. Didn't get it. I was too dumb. I was too friggin' stupid. I was too immature for it. Later in life, though, especially as I began to indulge my fascination for the First World War and the Lost Generation writers that followed it, like Hemingway, like Fitzgerald, I became fascinated with the Lost Generation. This is the generation of people who grew up in the First World War and who then were adults after it and had this horrendous, some of them, this horrendous experience of actually fighting in the war and had lost all faith in everything. You lost all faith in religion, lost all faith in church, in government, in society. How could you maintain a faith in all of the institutions that created and endorsed the absolute horror and slaughter that some of them experienced for years? They call it the Lost Generation, not just because millions of them were killed. Quite literally, some of them were lost. You go to any First World War cemetery, and most of what you will read on the headstones is a soldier of the Great War known unto God. No known grave, or they have no idea whose friggin' body they put in there for a lot of very grisly reasons. So they were quite literally a lost generation, many of them in the mud of Flanders, and then lost from society, the millions of soldiers who were killed, and then those who remained lost in a sense of they're just lost in life. What do you believe in when you've watched millions of people be senselessly slaughtered in the most hideous and insane ways with the endorsement of your government, your church, your institutions? Lost, cynical. There's one reason why the Roaring '20s were an insane drunk fest, is because people were processing a trauma and they had developed this sense and this belief that we're here for a good time, not a long time. Your government can send you off to fight in the trenches at any given moment. Everything that you love, everything that you have can be taken away and you with it at any given moment. And so who cares? Who cares anymore about planning for the future? What future? What future is there to look forward to? My head's destroyed. I'm just going to go drinking. That's what I'm going to do. That's the Roaring '20s. Partly in America, it was an economic boom because they made out pretty good out of the First World War. But for the most part, a lot of the people in that generation, you see women utterly throwing off the shackles of what was considered propriety, dancing the Charleston, hanging out in what should be segregated clubs. They just threw all of the cultural mores out and blew their brains out because they were lost. Nothing to believe in anymore, nothing to work for, nothing to hope for anymore. That was the Lost Generation. And this finds its way into the literature of The Sun Also Rises. This finds its way into Gertrude Stein. This finds its way into F. Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby. And so as I began to learn more and began to indulge my fascination with the First World War, I picked up Gatsby again and found in it probably my favorite novel of all time. The Great Gatsby is brilliant. And I did not enjoy the Leonardo DiCaprio movie. I didn't enjoy it because they dumbed it down. The opening scene of that movie, you've got the character of Nick in a VO saying, "We all drank too much." We just drank too much, reflectively thinking about the era. That's not what it was about at all. That's not what Gatsby was about. We all drank too much. Don't dumb this down for the audience. Just tell the friggin' story. You didn't need that, right? You didn't need to present it that way. It's a brilliant novel. It is a brilliant novel about a place and time. And the way that that plot weaves together and what happens is just the work of a brilliant mind and a brilliant writer. And I was too young and stupid to appreciate that in high school. Having read it later as an adult, as somebody who had some understanding of the Lost Generation and a fascination with it, Gatsby just blew my mind. Continues to blow my mind. I'll just pick it up and I'll look at it sometimes, and it's just like, this is just a brilliant work of fiction, and it might be my favorite novel. What's my favorite nonfiction book? The Bible, obviously. Andre Agassi's autobiography, Open, is probably my favorite piece of nonfiction. That isn't the Tao or something like that. Agassi's book, Open, is like MASH for me. I go into the bookstore, and this happened within recent memory. It was on the discount shelf, a copy of it. And I just picked it up and opened to a random page and then couldn't put it down. I don't know how long I was standing there reading it. And it was written with, or maybe even written by, J.R. Moringer, who is a absolutely fantastic writer. He wrote The Tender Bar, his own memoir, which is brilliant and heart-wrenching and sweet and sad and powerful. Just a fantastic writer. And Agassi's Open is probably, I don't know, is it wise to say the best piece of nonfiction I've ever read? It's certainly the one that most captivated me. And I was a tennis fan in the 80s, 90s. Another one we could add to my favorite things. Who's your favorite tennis player? It's John McEnroe. But second to that is Agassi and then Federer. So in the 90s, I remember Agassi, Attitude is Everything, the long hair. I was a rock and roll guy. I loved it. Loved Agassi. Got frustrated watching him lose to Sampras all the time. So when I picked up the biography later, and he's talking about how that was just BS, and he had the hair plugs, the hair extensions, and he hated tennis. He hated frigging tennis because his dad was a slave driver. His dad forced him into tennis, and he hated every second of it. And there was a point during his career where attitude is everything, image is everything, and then he disappeared. He dropped to like 200 in the world. Where did Agassi go? And then he reappeared with his head shaved, wearing the traditional whites of Wimbledon. Who is this guy? And he had gone away, left the game. He was a huge celebrity, all that stuff, Brooke Shields. And he had gone away and found a purpose. He had found a purpose in charter schools for underprivileged kids. And he's like, I know a way to fund that. Tennis. And then he returned back to tennis with just this new seriousness, this new determination, this new purpose. And he became again world number one, and he won a bunch of Grand Slams, and a fascinating character. And this book is just so beautifully written, so powerfully written, probably by J.R. Moringer, that it's my favorite piece of nonfiction. So if you've not read Open by Agassi, ostensibly by Agassi, go read it, because it's an amazing read and a wonderful story. And especially if you were around watching 90s tennis, yeah, go read Open by Andre Agassi. It's fantastic. There's more I was going to talk about. I had more, what are my favorite things to do? And if there's some reaction to this episode, maybe I will do a part 2 of that. And maybe some of you want to throw questions at me, like what's your favorite X, Y, or Z? But once again, it's Tuesday, and I got to mad dash this thing to get published. And I want to apologize. I want to apologize for this episode if you didn't like it, but I got a hunch you might have. And again, it's aimed at some of the new listeners who don't know a lot about my context. And so here it is for you. Here's some of my favorite things. But I got to go. I got to edit this thing and get it published. And if you liked it, let me know. I'm curious. And I want to know your answers to some of these questions. What's your favorite song? What's your favorite band? My favorite band, of course, I didn't do that, but it's obviously King's X and has been for a long time. My favorite modern bands are The War on Drugs and Ghost. And, of course, all those glam metal bands I love so much. What's your favorite song? What's your favorite TV show? I want to know these things about you. What's your favorite film? What's your favorite novel? Who's your favorite writer? I want to know these things, man. So drop me a line and tell me. Maybe we can open up a dialogue. And I may not have a life lesson for you this week, I may not have a piece of wisdom for you this week, but if nothing else, hopefully I've provided at least 50 or so minutes of fun. One of the things I'm learning is that fun cannot be overrated, especially as we get older. I had somebody at a health fair tell me one time, an older woman who seemed to be doing it right. She had a twinkle in her eye and a bit of a chip on her shoulder. She said, people forget how to laugh. People forget how to have fun. And it's one of the things that ages them. And so as we sneak up on aging ourselves, maybe this was a little bit of fun for you. I hope it was. Those of you who are new and are interested, there's a little bit of context. I'm happy to tell you more if you have questions. Until then, I'm just going to go. All right, we can maybe do more of this later. I'm going to go for now. I want to thank you for the feedback on drowning lessons. That was the hardest episode I've ever released. And I got a lot of really nice feedback. And I learned from some of you that you're also facing fears, and I applaud that. I applaud all of you who are out there doing your very damn best in difficult circumstances, because I know the circumstances are generally not of our choosing. And sometimes life throws at us stuff that we just have to deal with. And those of you who are keeping your chins up, keeping your spirits high in the midst of those circumstances, I really applaud you and I really support you. And I want you to know that there's stuff you can do. There's stuff you can do to mitigate those circumstances, even though sometimes you just have to endure. And everybody who's keeping your spirits up, everybody who's still striving, everybody who's still trying, despite what would seem to be stacked against you, you have my salute, you have my support, you have my encouragement, and you have my respect. So good on you. And thank you for your feedback on the last episode. I really appreciate a little bit of a shot in the arm. It was difficult for me to do, but I think it resonated with some of you, and so that's terrific. I'm going to go. I'm going to shut up, shutting up, except to say good things happen when you put yourself out there, kids. And I do again apologize for this episode, but I hope you enjoyed. I also hope I will be back next week. It grows difficult. There are just times lately where it's very hard to find something to say, or something that at least I'm willing to say. For now, here you go. Do enjoy your week. Arsenal is top of the Premier League table by 6 points. And if that ain't a reason to celebrate, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you. Okay, bye.